Terry Giannoffrio was once a talented dancer, but one day, during a performance, she tragically slipped and broke her ankle, losing her job. This was a devastating blow to her career, leading to numerous rejections and auditions, and she even had to rely on medication to manage the pain. With no income, Terry moved in with her friend and temporarily stayed at her apartment. During her next audition, she was humiliated by Alan, the head of the dance troupe, who mocked her background, asking her to crawl like a pig on the floor after learning she grew up on a farm. Despite her desperation for the job,
but I won't humiliate myself.
Terry refused to give up. Her passion for dance reignited her determination, and she decided to visit Alan's residence to plead her case. However, while negotiating at the front desk of Alan's building, she felt a wave of dizziness and staggered out of the building. Just as she was about to collapse, an elderly couple caught her. Seeing that Terry was in poor condition, they took her back to their home to rest. The next day, Terry woke up to the warm hospitality of the elderly woman, who invited her to sit down.
You look terrible. Make it a Bloody Mary, Roman.
It became clear that they had some sort of connection to Alan. Their generous hospitality left Terry feeling both grateful and bewildered. After learning about Terry's recent hardships, the elderly woman offered her kind words of encouragement.
It's not our fools that define us. It's what we do afterwards.
They took Terry to the next room, revealing that the grand apartment complex was actually owned by the couple. The rooms were lavishly decorated, and the windows overlooked a church.
Oh, that thing's an eyesore.
They told Terry that if she wished, the apartment would be hers, rent-free. Terry was astonished by their generosity and couldn't understand why they were being so kind. She had always believed in helping others, as she had once helped a young woman escape her abusive boyfriend. Although initially hesitant, Terry's financial struggles and the fact that Alan also lived in the building led her to accept their offer, not realizing this was the beginning of her nightmare. Soon after moving into the apartment, Terry stumbled upon a dance shoe while cleaning, which appeared to have belonged to a previous tenant. Later, and invited Terry to a dinner at Alan's house that evening. However, when she arrived, she realized that it was not a group gathering but just her and Alan. It was only then that Terry learned the reason she had been invited. Mr. Roman, the elderly man, was an investor in Alan's dance company. The two spent the evening talking, and after Terry drank a glass of wine, that familiar dizziness hit her again. In her dream, she found herself tied up on a massive stage, surrounded by dancers in formal attire, with Alan standing in front of her. The next moment, a multicolored creature slowly crawled toward her. When she awoke from the dream, she found herself in Alan's room and realized what had happened the night before. The next day brought a surprising turn for Terry. She was accepted into the dance troupe's rehearsals. However, her injured ankle set her progress behind others, which led Catherine, a dancer in the troupe, to mock her repeatedly.
If you're gonna sleep your way into the show, you just have the talent to back it up.
To add to the situation, Terry began noticing bruises appearing all over her body. When she returned home that evening, and introduced her to a neighboring judge who lived in the same building. The woman warmly offered a bottle of herbal ointment and applied it to Terry's ankle. That night, Terry was amazed to find that her ankle pain had disappeared. But as if summoned by her relief, she had another disturbing dream, this time of a white-haired, horned creature. The next day was Christmas, and it hosted a masquerade ball for all the residents of the building. She introduced Terry to everyone with great enthusiasm, including an obstetrician named Ed, and also prepared a special gift for Terry, a necklace that was said to be 300 years old. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Terry went back to her apartment and immediately put on the necklace and coat to admire them. But strange events soon followed. Terry began experiencing frequent bouts of nausea. When she consulted Ed, she was shocked to learn that she was pregnant. Terry didn't want to tell Alan, as everything she had worked for seemed so fragile, and she didn't want the baby to derail her career. However, just as she was processing this news, the irritating Catherine barged into her life once more.
I hear drinking bleach works a treat. You could always get someone to push you down a flight of stairs.
That evening, in the building's laundry room, Terry came across some bleach. She hesitated over it. The door of a nearby washing machine suddenly swung open, followed by a strange noise from inside the drum. To her horror, Terry saw a bloodied baby inside, and in the reflection of the glass, she glimpsed the white-haired creature from her dreams. The following day, during rehearsal, Catherine taunted Terry again, but Alan arrived just in time. He had already learned about Terry's pregnancy and seemed to place great importance on the child, asking her not to let it affect her work. Meanwhile, Anne and her husband had also learned of the pregnancy, which infuriated Terry. She felt her privacy had been violated, and she didn't plan on keeping the baby anyway, and then led Terry to a bedroom, where a dusty crib sat in the middle, and explained that for decades, they had tried to have a child but had failed each time. Terry was presented with an offer she couldn't refuse. They promised her fame and recognition as a dancer, leveraging their powerful connections, instead of limiting her career to just one dance company. Eventually, Terry agreed to have the baby, but the pregnancy was extremely painful, and she was plagued with nightmares that woke her in the middle of the night. One evening, after waking up again, Terry was shocked to find the judge standing in her room.
I have to stop it.
Without warning, the judge lunged at her with scissors. Terry quickly locked herself in another room, watching cautiously until everything became quiet. When she finally opened the door, the judge was lying on the floor in pain. The next day, the judge was taken away, diagnosed with a mental illness. At that point, Terry discovered a hidden door leading to a large, abandoned room. Inside, she found a red Bible that detailed the monster from her nightmares. Fearing discovery, she took the book back to her room. The next day, as the musical's final rehearsal approached, Catherine mysteriously sprained her ankle as if an invisible force was twisting her bones, forcing her to the ground in pain. Terry was chosen to replace her and became the star of the musical as the lead actress. After the performance finally ended successfully, Terry felt another sharp pain in her abdomen while removing her makeup backstage. In shock, she looked down to see her stomach swell as if she were 10 months pregnant, with the child's face clearly visible beneath her skin. But when she looked up again, her belly had returned to normal. Terrified, she immediately called Dr. Ed, explaining the strange things that had been happening. The doctor, however, suggested that Terry might be suffering from extreme stress, causing hallucinations, and warned that if this continued, they might have to hospitalize her. Scared, Terry hung up the phone without further discussion. Later, while going through the red Bible Annie had given her, Terry found more disturbing references, including scenes of a demon's birth. Realizing the situation was far worse than she imagined, Terry packed her things, leaving the necklace and coat behind in the room. Her first stop after leaving was to investigate the previous tenant. After tracking her down using information from the dance company, the housekeeper informed Terry that the woman had disappeared 6 months earlier, leaving behind only a suitcase with photos, a necklace, and a Bible, which had several passages about Satan heavily marked. Determined to protect herself and her unborn child, Terry brought the red Bible to a church to pray. While there, a nun noticed the Bible and asked where Terry had gotten it. When she mentioned the infamous apartment building, the nun became visibly alarmed and warned her to stay far away from that place. The nun revealed rumors that the residents of the building were Satan worshippers and that the red Bible was their sacred text. Upon seeing a picture of the previous tenant, the nun recognized her immediately, recalling that she had once come to the church for confession after being subjected to terrible things by the people in the park. Unfortunately, the woman had died in a car accident while trying to escape, and witnesses claimed someone had been chasing her. The nun further explained that, at the turn of the century, the leader of the satanic cult claimed to have summoned the devil and left behind a son to carry on her legacy. When the nun noticed Terry's belly, she realized that Terry had been chosen by this group, which led her to drop to her knees in prayer. Accompanied by her friend, Terry went to a hospital to have an abortion. However, just as the procedure was about to begin, Terry kicked the doctor across the room. The woman stared at Terry in terror as if she had seen something truly horrifying, and within moments, the doctor was strangled by an invisible force and died on the spot. Terry's emotional state continued to deteriorate as she returned to the apartment, feeling utterly alone. One day, she noticed Annie taking the elevator down to the basement, so she followed her. However, Annie disappeared, and as Terry prepared to leave, the elevator began moving on its own, taking her to a non-existent second basement level. Terry stepped out into a narrow corridor and found herself in a theater, where a table was laid out with a horned mask, the red Bible, and a knife. At that moment, Alan emerged from the shadows, and Terry suddenly realized that everything from her nightmare had been real. Cult had been using her all along, and Alan had violated her as part of their plan. Enraged, Terry grabbed the knife and stabbed Alan. Terry suddenly realized in horror that the person beneath the horned mask was Roman, Annie's husband. In a panic, she rushed back to the first floor, but the door was blocked by the concierge, leaving Terry with no escape. She returned to her room, only to find Annie already waiting for her, with Roman arriving shortly after. Realizing that there was no way out, Terry turned the knife on herself. However, something strange happened. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stab her abdomen. It was as if some dark force was preventing her from harming the child she carried. It became clear to Terry that their true goal wasn't just summoning a demon. They needed her child as a vessel for the demon to inhabit. Terry had been chosen to become the mother of the devil's child. The creature that violated her that night was, in fact, the devil himself. They led her back to the living room, where a crowd of cult members had already gathered, cheering her on as if celebrating her initiation into their fold. Terry, observing the eerie expressions of the cult members, formulated a plan. As music filled the room, she began to dance with intense energy, releasing the pent-up frustration and anguish that had built up inside her. The girl who once dreamed of becoming a dancer now found herself expressing the pain and turmoil she had endured. With all eyes on her, Terry made her way to the window. Even though Annie realized too late that something was wrong, Terry didn't hesitate. She threw herself out of the window, ending her young life. It was a tragically ironic end. Terry, whose life had been marked by mockery and exploitation, used her final moments to deceive the crowd that had manipulated her. The girl who had always yearned for the spotlight had ultimately belonged to the darkness all along.